Welcome back to this episode of More Good Drinks with a character that we could probably talk to every week and derive something new, useful and opinionated from. Mikey Ball, the one and only king of flavour, king of product development, and now currently driving product development and distillation at Woodward Street Distillery. Welcome to More Good Drinks. It's been about a couple of years since we last talked to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me again.
Hey, always. This time we're not talking about fizzy. We are talking about innovation, which, we'll talk a little bit about Chi Vodka, I think, as we go through this process and what you're doing at Woodward Street in particular. But I wanted to, frame or put some context around an observation that I've had and that I think is useful for us to talk about when it comes to what is really innovation in the drinks industry versus another version of a similar idea or an imported kind of copy and paste. Or sometimes I've seen innovation actually just being a label that's put on product refinement, where you kind of take something that's an inherited idea or an adopted technique, you make it a little bit better, a little bit cleaner, you do it a little more efficiently, you add a new ingredient. If we want to pursue innovation, we've got to have a really clear idea about what innovation really is, how we get there, and then what its purpose is, because new for the sake of new isn't always that helpful. And within all of that, I guess this underpinning foundation that actually a lot of what we do in developing new products and developing new techniques is actually ancient techniques, old traditions, wise knowledge from people who have been before us, but applied in new contexts, in new ways. I'll start you with this question. When did you first notice the difference or the gap between copying, pasting techniques to derive a product versus strong, foundational, contextual thinking that drives true originality?
Yeah, I think the first time I started to really understand this, I was really lucky, as you know, to work with the Lion Group in London. And the first time this really clicked was the idea of question. It's effectively our process, which was question everything and just kind of take nothing for granted. So the deep dive, the understanding of everything you're working with, and almost the word innovation was another one of those pieces similar to actually sustainability that was kind of banned in house, like because it's this blanket term for things that could be anything. So I think probably innovation itself, off the back of understanding these types of things where we deep dive into ingredients and these historic cultures and these narratives that can kind of create these profiles, you start to understand what you could do and where this comes from and the idea of it firsthand. So I guess my way to describe innovation is effectively the byproduct of this kind of structural objective. So this creative objective that you're working towards, the actual innovation is actually the byproduct. You'll stumble upon that innovation, or you should be, in a well-produced piece. You should, the innovation comes, if that makes sense. That's the only way people make things innovative. Because as you said, this kind of copycat culture of, oh, I've seen this done this way, I'm going to just try that technique and that works. And then you go, oh, it's really innovative. And you're like, well, it's innovative in this market maybe, but right now, it's been used in this and this and this. So it is really to go out to be innovative as well, like to go out to try and create a product in that sense is also really tough. I don't think that's a way forward either. So I think it should be effectively a byproduct. And that's kind of where my teachings has come from. The techniques and that I work with. We've had this conversation, but Chi wasn't set out to be this innovation product. And then we kind of realized quite quickly afterwards that we'd combined a whole heap of ancient techniques and just by literally, R&Ding each separate piece of the product.
To what extent then is the way you understand an ingredient or an objective, is that the more foundational piece than trying to do something new? That's effectively what you're saying?
100%. Yeah, okay. I think so. And this all comes down to what you're actually trying to achieve, right? So that objective is whether it's a flavor, whether it's a structural element of a finished product, whether you're looking to create something that works in a demographic, whether it's a chameleon of products, something that can be this, but also if you really want it to, it can be like that. Kind of all of the best things. Yeah, I think that you're on the nose. That's completely right. Yeah.
Are there examples that you can point to where it's easy to see what we're talking about, where it's easy to see, hey, maybe this is a little more copy and paste rather than, or a little more derivative rather than truly original, and whether that's here in the New Zealand market or further afield?
Yep. Yeah, I think, and there's also maybe some creative wordsmith going on as well here to make things sound innovative, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Which again, like I'm big on wordsmithing, but also like you need to follow it through with how you put the piece across, and also when you wordsmith something, there can't be black holes. You can't have grey areas. You have to be able to explain what everything is, right? The idea of full disclosure when you're going to write something up in a specific way has to kind of be proven, or as far as I'm concerned. There's obviously a couple of pieces on the market that I've seen. In fact, I think I've judged before as well that are using ultrasonic processing. Would be probably the one piece that I'd pick up on. And I've seen the term ultrasonic distillation used, which very misleading as to what it is. As far as I'm aware, they're not using an ultrasonic bath to distill, but also there's no information around. If they are, there's an incredible technique, incredible process, and they should be shouting from the rooftops about what that is and how that makes their product incredible. And I don't see that. So that's a pretty good example of we've taken something that we've seen people do, which is a speed up shortcut technique. We love one of those in New Zealand. And gone, right, how can we skin this so it seems legitimate or authentic? So that's one example. I'm not, yeah, that's probably the best from me. But also, like, again, a technique that is really useful, but put in the wrong terms and not understood properly, can come across like that. And you'd be like, well, yeah, I mean, this is a shortcut piece that you've seen or read and not really understood, and thrown it into a commercially viable, trying to create a commercially viable product with it, just straight off the bat.
It's interesting what you've stumbled on there, I think, I'm interested to explore it with you, is the relationship between authenticity and genuine originality. Because a lot of what you're talking about is, hey, if you can poke holes in it, if there's a thread of inauthenticity to how you're describing your process or what you're saying you're trying to do or achieve, then that's indicative of perhaps it's copy and paste versus having gone to the depths of building it from the foundations up. Would that be a fair enough statement? Like, how do you think about authenticity? Because that's such a buzzword in product development, right?
Totally. I mean, it's the why, right? So, I mean, let's use the ultrasonic bath as a specific piece. Like, why have you used that? Do you understand that it's a homogenizer that works on sound waves? Do you know exactly what that does to all the ingredients that are in your product? Have you tried it in a traditional way? Does it do the same thing? Does it do something different? What does it add to the situation? And if it's just being used in this case because it sounds cool, which, that happens too, then it's kind of like, well, that's where you can poke those holes and be like, well, actually, sometimes there's a reason why people have been distilling gin for hundreds of years in a pot still, right? And this is coming from a guy who has a rotovap. I have an ultrasonic bath. I have all this tech, and I do specific things with them from a treatment point of view, and I understand how all these pieces work. But it is really the best way to get something across with that type of specific technique is really understand what you're working with. Rotovap, for instance, an incredible product to work with if you know what you're doing. But and this is maybe not to throw other people under the bus, but there's a lot of bars with them behind the bar, and they've learned from somebody who's learned from somebody, and effectively they're using them to cold infused spirits. It's a $20,000 macerator that literally does it at room temperature under vacuum. Which I would argue it's probably not worth that much money if you're not using it for what it's made for.
The ROI, right? Cost per use,
right?
It's
100%.
Skyrocketing.
But it looks cool and it spins, and it can make things look different colors. So I guess it's, again, that's it. I come from that understanding of treatment, and that you're looking at how you can get the best out of everything, but also with that the best flavor and exactly what you're looking for. There's 25 different ways to skin a cat. There's 25 different ways to use, for instance, we were talking about it yesterday, but using a plum, whether you use the skins in a certain type of infusion and you're getting all that bitterness and tannin, whether you're just using the flesh, whether you want to keep the stones and get some sort of aniseed flavor profile. Do you want all of it? and then in which case that's a different treatment.
Mm.
So it's really understanding what you're working with, and like there's also people around. I think the secretive nature often of the market and this type of creation piece is like, well, often people aren't going to be able to recreate what you do, and I guess it was something that we talked about before, but the whole copycat piece, and I think we might talk a little bit further about it. But one of the things that we had at the bar in London and at Dandelion was like we'd give out recipes. Somebody came in and said, "Hey, how do you make the koji hard shake?" I'm like, "Here's the recipe for the koji syrup we make, and here's the recipe for the drink." Like, because at the end of the day, like it's the biggest form of flattery, first of all, but also they're probably not going to produce the same. They're not going to go to the lengths to produce that same product. And if they do, it's a different drink, and it's a cool rendition of what you do. It's a learning piece, right?
Some of what you're describing it really illustrates the very thin lines between inspiration and genuine education and then exploration. Like, okay, I've seen something and here's an idea and now I've got a bit of knowledge about it. But that's not, as you say, the recipe is not the same as teaching the technique, which is also not then the same as having enough foundational understanding of that technique and the koji in terms of, koji syrup, using that as an example, to then be able to go and explore further. And those are the thin lines that sometimes we don't see, and we think that we're effortlessly stepping across them, but actually in pursuing new knowledge or deeper understanding, we've got fragments rather than the whole piece, which I think brings us to, as you're talking about, right, where does knowledge come from when we do have these, in some instances, really ancient cultures that have been distilling, fermenting, macerating, using ingredients in certain ways for centuries. When we have that foundational knowledge, the deeper our understanding gets of that, the more capable we are of using that as a lens to see new things, rather than just a blueprint of, well, here's how we do what the Scots have been doing, right? Here's how we take copper pot stills and specific fermentation recipes and yeast strains, and we just transplant that from Scotland to New Zealand, and now we've got New Zealand whiskey. That's not actually how it works. That's a blueprint. Like, a lens gives you the opportunity to see the future, but with all of the knowledge and wisdom of what you understand about what's been before in other places. How is that rolling? Because I think Chi Chi's a great example of taking some of those techniques and lenses but applying them to something new. How does that roll in your practice?
I think often, like, a lot of this is base knowledge. If you've done research, I mean, like Chi Chi's example, obviously an understanding of sake and culturing, but also, there's a lot of deep diving and understanding how that works. We all work with rice and all of these things. I think that the aim of all of this is actually the fact that, like you said, there's that kind of gray area, that really thin line. Like, it's often surface, and you could pull this technique and you could use it once and it could be good. But the difference between good and great is pretty strong, right? Like that's different. Or the difference between good and maybe, I guess, character or category bending is massive. So the understanding of those ingredients and that further deep dive on how you can play with that technique, or how you can use that technique in a completely different way. I mean, this is creativity versus replication, right? So, if I was to just use a specific, like, we played around multiple times, specifically with Chi Chi, we're using a combination of different kojis, which, took 6 or 7 attempts probably just to get that section right. Then the blend of our coconut versus coconut water, how we work with that and how that played, and the profile and the acidity and the pH. Like, these things can go super deep, whereas I think often you can just throw shit at the wall and maybe it sticks okay the first time. But the replicability of that, and also the fact that actually, yeah, you can make it work. It might taste great, but fuck, imagine if this was even better.
Mm.
So I think you have to deep dive. You have to understand what you're working with, and well, as every distiller in the country would say, every distiller in the world would say, like, no product's ever really finished. I'd never say that any product's finished, and that's because there's inconsistency. As much as you try and make your ingredients or your process consistent, there's so many variables that can change a product, that the creativity and the R&D it has to be ongoing.
One of the interesting parallels for me in this is actually the distinct parallel between what happens behind the bar and what happens in the distillery or the workshop where products are being created. The same principles and processes in an ideal world should apply, right? That in the same way that I can spout the recipe for my favorite drink to a bartender and they can put it together, but and serve it to me, and it's going to be a version of that drink that I love, but they're not going to have any understanding of why I've paired that rye with that particular, cassis, with those particular balances of chocolate bitters to get the profile that I enjoy so exactly. They're not going to understand any of the why, but they can recreate it. Recreation is not the same as having a genuine reason or a genuine understanding of what you're trying to achieve and where. And I think you're right. Your comment about, we love a shortcut in New Zealand is something that's possibly a really valid part to start unraveling the whole thing of like, man, why do we love a shortcut? What's our obsession with wanting to reduce the time it takes us to produce something that's really, really good, that's so good that it does bend category or it changes consumer demand, because that's the other piece of, it doesn't matter to me if there are 17 other gins that I also like on the market. If I discover a gin that I truly love, that I truly think is exceptional, and that product stands up to the rigor of, well, why and how, I'm going to be converted as a customer, for potentially for a long time to that product. But I'm not interested if it's, just, here's another Horopito gin, or here's another Kawakawa leaf, or here's another, those are some of those examples of recreation, right? Somebody had a good idea, people have all kind of done their own version of it. How do we elevate that conversation for producers, whether they're behind the bar or, in the distilling industry? How do we elevate and say, guys, the time can be worth it?
Totally. I think it's, and you kind of nailed it, like the blueprint suddenly fails. Is kind of how that works, right? You could create one thing, and I'm sure you can say the same. And even I've worked for brands, and we've seen it happen, and I know everybody has from R&D point of view. But you can create one thing, and you're like, wow, this is awesome. And we've both myself and you have sat on tables and judged spirits from one year, and then we've judged them the following year, and you're like, whoa, this is not the same product. It's but it's not just a slight rendition on that product. It's a completely different product. And that's where the kind of, I guess, the supply, the communication, but also mainly the blueprint of where the thought process is. Have you cheapened your brand or cheapened the product by using a different botanical? If so, how have you made up for that part of the flavor profile? Because, Gin as an example, Beefeater, Tanqueray, Gordon's, those recipes, whilst they probably also change every so often, they have made their names in being incredibly consistent at what they do with 5 to 6 ingredients in them, right? Whereas if we're adding, as you said, Horopito or Kawakawa, from year to year, Kawakawa berries are completely different flavored. Whether they're male or female also means that they're different. Where they're sourced, what time of year they were picked, like all of these things are massive variables. And then if we only surface this, then you're going to quite quickly be stumped by the fact that this product that you're creating is a completely different thing every time.
I remember being stumped on a distillery tour once upon a time as the person who was taking me on the tour, and they're also the person responsible for 95% of production nowadays. And I asked why they were using the particular yeast and the particular fermentation period that they were. And the answer was, oh, that's because that was the founder's recipe. That was the founder's plan from the get-go. And it struck me even then that, and like this vastly intelligent human that I deeply respect. And I was like, oh, the education around why does matter. And I think people can probably listen to us go on about like how important understanding is, how important understanding the root of something is, and go, oh yeah, but really, actually, and yet in practical purposes, the foundational understanding of why and how to build the structures that our industry actually relies on is the difference between a terrible super juice and one that actually is going to do the job that you want it to do behind the bar. And so it does have this really practical, application. And I'm one for, I like confession, which will come as no surprise to you. I often am asking myself the question when I walk into a bar, for example, and see a range of house-made ingredients that are effectively iterations or recreations of products that are available on the market, even here in little old New Zealand. But, we all have market variation around the world. I see those house-made products and I want to know why. I desperately want to understand why the choice to make that in-house versus using something that is going to deliver with consistency and has been perfected over time. And, and because just for the fun of it, just because it makes us seem better or it makes us seem cooler is actually it's not a strong enough reason when you're talking about something that can go so foundationally wrong if you mess it up.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, this is, as I was going to say, like we've touched on it already, but there's that she'll be right type thing, or don't fix something that's not broken. And it's like, well, who's judging what's broken? Like, who's your judgment for what's broken? Because at the end of the day, and that's that Scotch whiskey piece. I remember listening to a seminar, I think it was with Dave Broom, and he was talking about the fact that, 95% of Scotch whiskey is made with one of two yeast strains. And you're like, right. Okay, like that's absolutely bonkers if you think about it, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's, just in New Zealand, was it something like 350 native yeast strains that are suitable for wine that have still never been used as well. Like, a lot of this is baked into tradition, and it's do it like that because that's what we know. And that's where you get these rogues and these brands who go, fuck, we're going to do something different. We're going to grow mold on buckwheat. We're going to do this fun stuff, and we're going to try and create it. And then suddenly they've changed the mold. They've bent the category because they've taken the exact same blueprint, but they've used it in a completely different way. They've taken something that does the same thing, that sacrifices sugars, yeast, mold, whatever it is, creates different type of proteins, but in the finished product shows exactly like a new make would, but tastes completely different. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
and that's exactly it, right? That's the difference between here's a blueprint that just keeps you within the lines of how everybody's done it, that baked in tradition, versus, okay, here's a lens. What happens if we turn the blueprint around and do it this way?
Right. But then that's the other piece is, and this is the question we always have in house, is what makes us different? Like, why are we different? And why should people buy us over something that's existed for 300 years? And it's like, well, we do this, we do this, we do this. We look to do this. These are the pieces that we're our core values. This is how our brand is built. And these are the pieces that we talk about. This is our songbook, right? Whereas, if you and the flip side of that is Scotland, Scotch whiskey, the history is the narrative. That's the piece, right? They've been producing whiskey for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that's that narrative, right? So you can play on the narrative side as well, the story. So the story piece, how you talk about it. So it just goes to show how a product is it's so important. All of it's so important. But we've purely been talking about the liquid side and the technique and the process. But actually, products in the market, a lot of products mainly exist because of narrative and story too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're obsessed with the liquid and the glass, and a lot of consumers, it's all about the label.
100%, and how it looks, right?
Yeah, and that's equally valid. Like that's the piece that I think is, you can talk about how important it is for the liquid to be authentic, for it to be rooted in good structure and solid understanding, for it to, and even if you are doing something that's a recreation of a classic dry gin, then do it so exceptionally well that the product's consistent and beautiful and well regarded, and have a narrative that backs that up, right? All of that is solid. And the application of all of that same technique and pursuit of thoroughness, depth, authenticity is equally important when it comes to the label and the story that you tell, right?
100%. And you need to be able to pick that product up if it sits in a category and it's still unless you've done a really good job of marketing it as something that's different in this category, it still needs to show like that, right? I mean, Chi-Chi, for example, for us, it's still a vodka. It still does all the things that vodka does. If you don't care about the process or care about the geekery that we put into it, it still makes well, as far as we're concerned, a delicious vodka soda. It's a delicious vodka base. It's awesome in martinis. We've also thought about that. That's how we've created it, right? I think the look is a huge thing, and we're actually going through this piece at the moment, which we're kind of coming to the back end of. But There's a piece where in New Zealand we've been able to create a product that could fit in pretty much any bottle. We can put a label on it, slap a label on it, she'll be right. It's a local New Zealand product that's sold off its merits. And people were like, yeah, cool, awesome, local vodka made down the street, sweet as. But when we put that product, after shipping it from this side of the world to the UK, suddenly it's a 30 to 40 pound bottle of spirit on the back shelf, more expensive than, those 4 big gin houses or those bigger vodka houses that we've just talked about. Then suddenly it has to do something different. It has to look different. I mean, the liquid, we feel the liquid does something different, but it has to show like it's premium, like it does something different, and there's a reason why somebody was stupid enough to ship it from the other side of the world here, I guess. So yeah, looks can kill for sure.
Yeah, I mean, some of what I think is dangerous in the world of innovation is that it's really easy to confuse a new version with innovation. It's really easy to confuse first time it's been done here as being innovative. It's really easy to confuse we've done a beautiful execution with innovation. And so as you start to unravel all of those pieces, I end up coming back to that scenario that you've just posed, which is a bottle on a shelf, whether it's in the UK, the US, emerging markets, here in New Zealand. The price is right until it's not. And so the big piece, and for a long time, people were actually prepared to pay, a premium for a New Zealand made spirit precisely because it was made in New Zealand. That was the qualifier. Didn't have anything else. Like, people didn't necessarily have to do a lot of the work that they're now doing. That's not to say that there aren't examples of great work in that space.
No, not at all.
But it was really easy to sell on merit, your version of or somebody else's version of. How do you unpack and find a place for Chi Chi vodka in consumer demand? Like, how do you find that commercially, creatively, culturally to go, right, it's worth taking the time to make this product from using coconut and koji and a range of different techniques and borrowing from other cultures, or one might say adopting from cultures that are relevant to where we exist in the Asia Pacific basin, and then to take that to market. Innovation, you can be innovative, you can create entirely new and original things, but ultimately in the commercial world we live in, there still needs to be a space. You still need to discover, are people interested enough to buy it at the price that it costs us to make it. So how have you tackled that? How has Chi Chi tackled that?
I mean, yeah, it's a really good point. And again, it's something that we've kind of thought about all the way through, and very much right from the start, we were looking at where the vodka market currently is. You look at the big houses who have taken the products that when I was a young bartender were $100 on the shelf, and they are much cheaper. They've done premium versions of those products to put on the shelf, and maybe some less glamorous versions of them too. Suddenly there's hundreds of, a lot more SKUs per house, let's say. So the market's a bit of a wobbly one, but it's nowhere near as wobbly as pretty much every other market in the world. So actually, for what it stands for, vodka at the moment is kind of sitting still. So we saw that as an opportunity to kind of be like, well, we can put this product in here, but actually if we do something that kind of bends the category a little bit, then suddenly there might be a bit more excitement around what vodka could be, or what we can how we can skin vodka as such. It does do a certain thing. Traditionally it's neutral, it's focused. You've been on panels with me as well. You taste character forward pieces, people producing products like the Reed from Cadrona that are very much focused on the raw ingredients, which is awesome, and that's super cool to see. I think that again like changes how this category works, because people talk about the raw ingredients, but often then it's distilled out in seven different columns, or however we want to look at it, and made to be as neutral as possible. So this idea, I think we call it culture, but like the idea of putting culture back into something that actually, if you take it back to where it was originally, the bits that you didn't cut out, like its style, its culture, then I think that's kind of what Chi Chi is. The idea of Chi Chi is to bring back this structural luxury, this focus on texture, but also it's still vodka. Like that's the long and short of it. It showcases its base, so it is for all intents and purposes a yeah, like I guess a base spirit style, but we're not distilling that base spirit, and we're also very outward. We're very open about that. We tell everybody what it is and where it comes from, because we've taken an ingredient that we know is high quality and we've played with it to make it even more high quality and what we think is high quality, and emphasize it.
There is I guess the question I want to ask is when when you're first thinking about this product and how you sell it, how you tell the story, how you give people that experience as product, like the Chi Chi as it's telling its own story in the New Zealand market right now. There's lots of disco. There's lots of push into the fun of actually just going out for the night and ordering a drink that's remarkably simple but can deliver so much in terms of palate and mouthfeel, like a vodka soda. The way Chi Chi's kind of telling its story, it feels like it's telling its story to both people in industry as well as consumers. But is there a sense for you of who needs to listen first, of who needs to draw in and be inspired by what vodka can be?
Yeah, I mean, we look at it like a chameleon, right? This idea of like something that can, and we've talked about this, and where I come from, but like the idea is that everything is packed full of story, potentially technique as well, and reasoning behind it. But if you don't want to know about that, that's totally fine. We still make it look beautiful, and we think that you'll think it's delicious, right? So I think there's two kind of different narratives for sure in the way it comes across, but I think the versatility piece is a big play here as well. We're very conscious, and we're still playing something that's very traditional, is this kind of draw from on-premise first. So, if we can get this liquid behind the bar, if we can get this liquid on lips of bartenders, and we can give them this, what we think is really good ammo to talk about a local product that we don't see a lot of people talking about in this way. Talk about technique, talk about culture, talk about the techniques that go into it that are like surrounded by disco, by entry into America for vodka, like all of these different pieces, then it has a narrative. It's creating that experience with a bartender that then will create an experience with people. So to be honest, it's probably, the on-premise, the hard work is always done in the on-premise, but at this current stage in the world, it's probably the hardest way to do it, but also I think it's the most legitimate and the most authentic way to do it. Mm-hmm. And if we can parallel that with having the product available and market it well in the commercial market, I think that's kind of as winning a recipe as we're going to be able to get. And we can kind of continue, once we have a little bit more under our belts, we'll be able to see kind of exactly how that tracks out.
As you talk about all of the pieces that have story, that have authenticity, I can't help but the metaphor that springs into mind is that classic 70s light up dance floor, where grid by grid, it doesn't matter what entry point into the Chi Chi story you land on, whether it's the emergence of vodka into America in the 70s, or the origin of ingredients that you can be carried. Like it feels like it doesn't matter where you land, your foot's going to light up a grid on the dance floor, and you're like, it's all got such solid footing. For you as a storyteller and an architect of flavour, and I mean, every component of the product's been thought through meticulously by you, it is always then interesting to hear you say, and if you're not interested in that, hey, that's fine. Because I think so many people, it's really easy as a producer, and I hear it all the time in my work from producers who they can't help but care about why people choose their product. And that's the strange inversion for me in terms of how we think about authenticity and how we think about the innovation and how we think about the why that threads through the product development process, is that for a lot of producers, they really, really care about why people are going to choose their product almost more than they care about why and how they're making it themselves. And I think that's an interesting button to push, to go, hey, so how did you get to a point of being able to go, hey, if you don't want the story, that's fine.
Totally. And also off the back of that, and again, like this is a bar piece for me, but like often people don't want to know the story to start with, but they enjoy the liquid or whatever the drink that you've built for them is. And suddenly they come back next time and they're like, okay, that's the format here. That's what they do. And it's the same with a spirit, right? So they get more intrigued. Maybe they jump on the website and have a look, and they kind of get a bit more of an understanding. So even though people can often come across as like, I don't like vodka. You're like, well, if you give them a little taste and they still don't like it, and you've tried, right? But the flip side is if they have a vodka soda and it's no different to a standard vodka soda, but they felt that it was maybe more quality and they got a great experience with it, that also speaks volumes, right?
Again, we kind of end up coming back to this component where the experience of a product is as much the product itself, and I'm interested in how you treat that experience layer now. You know, if and it I guess it does sort of reflects back on the question before about the parallelism between creating products and then what we do delivering drinks behind the bar. What would it look like if hospitality in New Zealand was taking the same approach that you're encouraging amongst other producers in terms of understanding foundations, having a deep connection to the why and the authenticity, and letting that be the thing that drives innovation as a byproduct? You know, what would it look like for you? What do you think we'd start to see?
I think we'd see a lot more world class for sure, like from a drinks point of view. I think less is more in that sense. So the more you can do of that in the smaller parcels and make it exceptional. You know, for instance, if you were to look at, there's a handful of bars, but, you know, places like in New York, Dante's, for instance, who, you know, kind of reworked the Garibaldi, which for all intents and purposes was a great drink. I love a Garibaldi, but the Dante's Garibaldi is like, it's Campari and orange juice, but it's not just Campari and orange juice. Like, the execution is off the charts, right? The way it's served, the way they put it across. And this is like, well, all you've had to do is just put the thought in, deep dive into why this is good, what this does, how it's been put together, and then how you can make that better as part of an experience. What did they do? They freshly juice orange in front of you. You can see it. There's instantly this smell of orange in the room. You're getting chat across the bar. It looks beautiful. It's got this sunshine hue. Like, it's the little stuff that you don't maybe think about. So I think less is more, and it's kind of pulling it all back to, you know, there's also bars at the high end too that do too much stuff, right? Like, I mean, I've seen, you know, drinks with upwards of 50 ingredients in them. And I would argue similar to what we've often seen in the distillation industry, especially in the gin market, where you're like, a lot of that stuff I can't taste here. Like, a lot of that stuff is what we'd call mud. Like, there's not anything from this apart from substance.
Yeah.
So it's really core in understanding what you're working with. And again, there can always be refinements. I'm really loving actually working with Cal at the distillery, but also with Bert's, when he'll bring a recipe to me and I'll be like, cool, this is awesome, but how can we, like, do we need this guy here? What does this do? What does this bring to the table? And we'll often refine a drink back, similar to how a chef works, to literally one ingredient and add the bits back on. But yeah, anyway, that's a bit of a drinks geekery piece. But I think, yeah, just more execution. And I guess, you know, if you were to take any international market inspiration, you could see that almost every venue that has done incredibly well has its kind of flagship showcase beverage of some description, right? There's a reason you go to Hawksmoor. You know, back in the day, you went to Hawksmoor for a Shaky Pete's. We at Dandelion, you know, people would come for the Koji Hard Shake because they were like, "Whoa, this is incredible." You know, Dante's, you had the Garibaldi there. Erin Rose in New Orleans, you went for the frozen Irish coffee. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be something crazy and high end, but it's their flagship. It's what they do. It's the showcase piece, right? So I'm a big believer in that too. I think that could be done way more in New Zealand. A few of the consults I worked on right at the start, and not all of them worked in the end because people didn't really understand, but I think I was very focused on trying to get them to build something that was a flagship, whether it was fresh juicing this on the fly or, yeah.
At the risk of repeating some wise words that I heard just earlier today from, you, sometimes you have to make good change before you make change. People have they've got such a privilege and opportunity to learn from you. And that's one of the things that I think is always so striking, is how generous you are with the knowledge that crosses over the thin line, right? Like, yes, you'll share a recipe, but actually the enthusiasm and energy that you have for helping other people to understand. I think about, you know, workshops and seminars on fizzy and carbonation and how to actually dial it in and get it just right. And many of those pieces, you are sharing some of that knowledge at Auckland Cocktail Week, right? You've got some bits and pieces coming up. What have you got outlined?
A fizzy one, yeah, another fizzy one. I think I'm doing a rework of the one that I did previously. Obviously, the situation was quite different last time, and the fact that the business I previously worked for kind of dropped off the face of the earth a week before. So I kind of lost a lot of the content, and it became a bit more of an FAQ. Sorry, like a Q&A type thing. But that was still cool. So what I've done for our, obviously, veranda kind of follows suit in that the whole idea of champagne body is what it's called. No, nothing to do with reggae.
Always a little bit to do with reggae, right?
But the idea was to give a bit of an understanding of kind of a really key pieces to execution. And then off the back of that, obviously I in the last 6 or 7 years, I've been quite privy to a lot of high volume production facilities, as well as where we produced ours. I've fought the fight for little guys to make sure that we're carbonating stuff properly in high production facilities. Again, like it's amazing how little they understand too. So that's been really cool. And I just kind of want to give a bit more insight into how you can take these commercial levels of understanding and recreate them in your bar. And a lot of it is just very simple tools and doing the right things at the right time and temperature. We can go deeper on that. So that's Champagne Body, the veranda piece, which will be a bit more of a fun one, a bit more chill, but lots more geeky on chat. And then the Chi piece is Hypermold. I don't want to tell too much about it because it's going to be heaps of fun. But we're going to do some really fast stuff. I'm going to recreate some pieces. You're going to see Chi effectively as an exploded drawing, but physical too, and liquids. So that'll be cool. And then we're going to whip something up literally at the end as something fun. So yeah, that's probably the most I can share about it. But it's a proper deep dive into what Chi is. We're looking to create, again, this is an experience for hospitality. So hopefully people walk away from what we're going to put across, and with even if it's just some understanding of what Koji is.
Cool.
And how that creates Chi. So yeah,
that's going to be a good time.
That's what we're doing.
We've got a rule in our house, which is always be learning. I'm pretty sure you've got that same rule just in your brain all the time. So what is the current, if you can disclose, what is the current research path and deep dive that Mikey Ball is exploring?
From flavor?
From anything.
Man, it's been pretty massive recently. There's some really probably quite boring stuff for most people, but the logistics of sending a product to the other side of the world's quite high on the list. Doing labels for products, multiple labels for different countries, is kind of blowing our minds at the moment with how different everything needs to be. Colors? Can color? We've been in a bit of a predicament the last few weeks on, cans versus boxes versus printed labels, and how to get that same Pantone across all three. Yeah.
Pantone is not the consistent gem you think it is, unless you take into consideration the media on which you are printing.
100%. So that's been a heap of fun, but also like boggling. So I'm learning a lot of stuff around that, but also obviously we've got a couple of new products which we'll tease at Auckland Cocktail Week too. A lot of deep diving into minerals and our water supply in New Zealand, and how we can play around with that, which you might see in our volcanic soda water, which we'll launch soon. And just in general, that type of stuff. Hey, mate.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. It has, as ever, been a blast.
No worries. No, thanks for having me. And yeah, feel free to fire me any messages, or if anybody needs any more help on liquid stuff, hit me up. Or I'll see you at Auckland Cocktail Week. We'll be there for 4 days.
Awesome.